The reality today is that America has got to get used to the fact that China is going to become the economic hegemony, without doubt. They are already.
Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon and this is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father and son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith. Today, I thought it would be good for us to talk about the trade war between China and the US. Trade war 2.0. I mean, this has been in the works since, I think, as early as 2018 during Trump 1.0, but obviously escalated, re-instigated now with Trump's second round in office. We were talking a little bit about it just before we recorded. And I mean, I think the moves are interesting. So the US has decided to impose a 10% tariff on all China imports. And similarly, then in retaliation, then China has imposed a 15%. I thought it would be good for us to, we'll go into a little bit more detail on how some of these things are playing out, what's the impact on the global economy as well. But I think what we'll do is let's talk about it through the lens of, we are a leadership podcast after all. So I think let's talk about it today through the lens of competition versus collaboration. And as we're doing that, I think it would also be good to see, I think in many ways, this kind of battle between the two, this trade war, is also a battle for control. So I think at some point we can also talk a little bit about that. What are some of the fallacies also of control as leaders, as we lead our teams, as we lead our households as well. But first, Dad, I mean, I think you in particular have been really keeping up to date on these developments. What's your current take?
The current take is that this trade war between China and USA is like a game of chess. Many people who are proponents of what Donald Trump is doing, they believe that raising tariff is a checkmate. But we all know that it is not the silver bullet. We all know because it happened before in 2018. Donald Trump announced this when he was president already in 2018. When he announced it on the 6th of July 2018, he announced a 25% tariff on Chinese imports, on all Chinese imports that impacted $550 billion of Chinese imports. So that was a very big move on his part. China actually retaliated at that time by imposing not as massive a tariff increase, but they are much more measured in the way in which they were doing it. They were looking at only very selected areas where they were importing the U.S. imports. It was only impacting $185 billion worth of U.S. imports, a lot less in doing it. So this trade war continued in version 1 when Donald Trump was there, right up to the 15th of January 2020, because it began to hurt both the U.S. economy and the Chinese economy. So both of them agreed that this continuance of this trade war is actually going to hurt both of us in the 2-year period that time. So they decided to have a ceasefire in agreement. So they signed a trade deal on the 15th of January 2020. It was signed, interestingly enough, between Donald Trump as the president of America and not Xi Jinping. It was signed with the vice premier Liu He. And at that time, you can think about it, it's almost like, Xi Jinping is saying that I'm big enough to go and do it. You sign it with my deputy. But in the meantime, you already knew the sunset art of war. The psychology has always been, while the ceasefire has been agreed on specific areas in the agreement, they begun to do many, many things that they know in the future this thing will come back. They know. So they did a lot of things in the meantime. So what were the things that they were doing? It was incredible what they were doing. The first thing they did was they wanted to diversify so that less and less reliance on the US. So they signed trade deals with the EU, with the European, with the ASEAN countries, and with many other countries, with all the BRICS countries, they signed so many deals, so that less and less dependence on US imports. That's one of the things they did. So systematically, the Chinese were already doing this, reducing more and more the reliance on the US, including oil and gas.
Yeah, but not just in terms of imports, but
Yeah.
even to do with the currency
That's another one.
dependence on the US dollar. as
Indeed,
we were
you're
discussing
absolutely
earlier.
right. So what they were doing was they signed what they call a bilateral currency swap agreement between the central banks in China and the central banks in 40 countries worldwide, including Malaysia. And so by doing that, the majority of the trades between those countries are no longer going via the US dollar. It was direct swaps between the two countries. Normally, those agreements last for 3 years. So they agree the quantum, how much money is put on the table for trade between the two countries for exchange, with pre-agreed agreements on how exchange rates are governed between the two countries. So today, as a result of all that, 53% of trades, international trades by China, is no longer going via the US dollar. And so this is actually a very big move on the part of China to avoid going via the US dollar.
53% is a lot.
It's a lot of money. And so they were doing this. So the latest thing that the other thing that they did was they already knew that modern technology today with, AI, data centers, all these technologies, is dependent on very important critical components, minerals, they call rare earth. So today, slowly over time, China has been building the capacity and they now control 87% production capacity. They now control it. So the Chinese, by reducing the supply of the rare earth to China, it will really put a huge problem on the big companies that manufacture all this equipment in the US, because they control it today. And so the Chinese have been doing this very gradually. And so over time. So of course, this time round, the second round of tariff, they said, okay, you have imposed 10%. We've also imposed 15% on LNG and coal as well, and 10% on crude oil on agricultural machinery and equipment. And also with this, they have added, apart from the tariff, Leon, the other thing that they have now done is that they have now started to do antitrust investigation on Google, US companies, and NVIDIA and Intel. So this antitrust, immediately they launched the investigations on this. And this is actually going to be quite a big impact on those companies that they are undergoing the, if you like, the antitrust. Just to look at some numbers, 80% of Chinese smartphones actually come from Google's Android operating system, but they're putting tremendous pressure under the antitrust to punish them. Who is going to benefit? Huawei and Xiaomi is going to benefit from doing this. So NVIDIA generated 1.7 billion US sales from China in 2024. And if they are facing regulatory hurdles, it's going to be very tough for NVIDIA. And so the other thing that they did this time around was they put many American companies under what they call China's unreliable entity list.
This one is very interesting. You want to maybe add some color to some of the impact? Maybe you can start by naming some of these companies.
Okay, I name one, for example.
What's the impact of
China has expanded the list to include a company called PVH Corp, which is the parent company of Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger, and Alumina as well, which is a biotech plant.
Yep.
What effectively it does, these restrictions, is that they're full of restrictions for PH, this company. So it will control, which China is a big market for them. In a year, the Chinese market, they sell altogether 900 million US revenue to China, PVH, which is Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein. By putting all these restrictions, it's virtually making life extremely difficult for that company. So 900 million ringgit worth of revenue is at stake actually by doing this. So all these are all taking place. So the response from the Chinese was almost immediate because they already did this before.
Yep.
They knew this and they knew exactly. It's almost like they said, we have the playbook. If you do it, this is what our response is. So when Donald Trump announced the effective date for the tariff round 2, I think the date that they put there is the 4th of February. Immediately, 10th of February, immediately China retaliated immediately. Because they knew in the playbook, they knew exactly what to pull. So I think it's very swift. So these are very difficult times for everybody. But the Chinese have already been preparing the ground for this trade war because of round 1. They knew round 2 will come. And so they're preparing the ground for it. And the other one was the thing called the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative, although it started in 2013, they just increased the momentum as a result of round 1 of the trade war. So as a result of that, 140 countries have signed into the Belt and Road Initiative network, they call it. And so quite a lot of businesses is now coming out from the countries under the Belt and Road Initiative. Let me just give some numbers to it. As a result of the Belt and Road Initiative, China has reduced its dependency on U.S. imports from 19% to just 13% last year. So that's a big reduction. So the total trade within the Belt and Road Network has increased to altogether $2.5 trillion US. That's a lot of money for total trade in a year. So that is what they have been doing. It includes countries like Russia, Pakistan, Indonesia is absorbing a lot of the China export, as previously it was relying very much on the US market. So they're shifting away from the US. Instead of exporting to the US, they're exporting to these countries. And so that's what they've been doing, slowly doing this. So really diversifying the trade partners is one of the key responses of China.
Yeah. I mean, very strategic. Peter Drucker said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I think in many ways, what you've just described is China already anticipating perhaps a re-escalation of the trade war. And so they sort of created the future by putting all of these things in place. Now let's go into what is the impact then of all of this? As the two nations kind of battle it out for control over the global economy, obviously then those of us, other nations on the wayside, also get affected. But what are some of the potential impact on the rest of the world?
So the first one is inflation. So what it means is that if America impose the new tariff on Chinese imports, the guys who are paying for this is the companies that import it. They have to pay the import duties. When they pay the import duties, eventually they will increase the price. They pass through the price to the consumers. So the Americans will pay for it eventually because through increase in prices in the domestic market. The same thing with China too. When China import from America, and the Chinese companies are going to pay for the tariff, and when they pay for the tariff, they will pass it to the consumers. So the Chinese consumers will pay for it. So inflation will rise. The other thing that will happen will be to avoid the increase in tariff. Many of the companies in the US, many of the companies in China will start looking at overseas countries where they will put manufacturing plants. They joint venture with countries in those companies.
Like we're one example.
Malaysia, for example, data centers. Why people are putting data centers here is because for that very reason. And many are exactly doing that. So they said, if I put a factory in Malaysia or Indonesia or in Vietnam, and then from there it gets exported to the US, it will not be subject to those increase in tariff. So the effect of that for both the US and China is that it will reduce investment in their country and they will lose jobs because the jobs will shift with the investment. Not only do they lose the investment, they will also lose the jobs. When you lose the job, you will lose corporate taxes that has to be paid. When the company in that country makes a profit, they pay taxes in that country. So they will lose taxes. The government revenue will lose. So in the long run, this idea of unhealthy competition it's not good for China. It's not good for America as well. And so I think for the global world, it is going to cause a lot of difficulties because supply chains will be disrupted as a result of all these things that will happen, and costs will rise into the supply chain, and there might be a global slowdown. IMF predicted a global slowdown as a result of this, and it's very clear. You look at the past in the Donald Trump version 1.0, when they announced a tariff, it had caused a dampening in the growth rates of the world. So there was an economic slowdown that took place from it. But if this war continues and there's no ceasefire and it's escalate and escalate and escalate, and it becomes very bad, it could lead to a recession, global recession. That's the worst case scenario. But I hope that they will soon realize that this unhealthy competition, as they found out in 2020, when they went out to begin this trade war, 3 series of them from 2018 right to 2020, that they went for the ceasefire because they realized that he hurt both of them. Interestingly enough, who is the one who signed it? As I said, it's Donald Trump himself. He signed the ceasefire, but it was not Xi Jinping that signed it. It's the vice premier that had signed. But that was almost like a ceasefire and a truce. But you know that people have now planted the seed that this ceasefire is temporary and it can erupt, and that's exactly what happened today.
Now let's look at it from a company standpoint or just a general leadership standpoint. You know, we've now discussed that there's a cost to the competition, there's a cost to control. What does this look like then in a team or in an organization?
Yeah, very, very clear. The first thing you must always do is that never underestimate the competition. We mentioned it in the last episode. If you underestimate the competition, if you believe you can do a checkmate on them and expect them to take it lying down, you are actually going down a road of spiraling down. And so you always want to say, if you want to do this, be careful that if you hurt the competitor, it will also hurt you. You shouldn't do things like that. For example, if you want to take market share in any country, very simple, you drop your prices. You drop your prices and you get market share, but you lose money. But you know what the competitor will do? They will also retaliate by dropping prices, and they both lose money. And eventually, both companies will be lying down bloodied in the field in that battle. And so, I'm chairman of Heineken. It's very important. We don't want to create a trade war that kills our company as well as also kill the competitor too, because that's what I call unhealthy competition. And so I believe there's always an opportunity for collaboration. There's always an area for competition. But you do not collaborate in areas that run you into what is called antitrust. But you must not go and do, for example, the area where Heineken and Carlsberg collaborate is how do we work together with the government, Heineken as well as Carlsberg, to deal with what you call fake beers, contraband beers. Contraband beers. And these are people that bring in imports where tariffs are very low, import tariffs are very low. Like Cambodia is very low, 5%. Malaysia is only almost 40% for liquor. And they bring and they don't pay duty. They bring it here, illegally bring it in. It's genuine beer, but it's contraband, illicit beer. And they started by dropping prices. So we are working together with the government and together with Carlsberg, collaborating as an industry. This is no antitrust. We are doing it because it is the Malaysian government lose a lot of money. They lose a lot of money annually because these guys bringing in all those products without paying taxes. And the same thing with tobacco. I would say 90% of the tobacco consumed in this country, they are contraband. They're not paying taxes. Or the government loses
90%.
Yeah, 90% because it's so easy to bring it. But liquor is a bit more difficult to bring across border.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult. I would say even the beers that are sold in Sarawak and Sabah, Our estimate in the industry and the government is 70% of the beer sold in Sabah and Sarawak are contraband. They're not paying taxes for it. There's a lot of money that's being lost. So in that area, collaboration is very important. And I think this business of lowering prices to compete and gain market share, but I can tell you, you will do it, but you'll hurt yourself. In the same way, I would liken it back to China. The two economic superpowers, China and America, if they fight this tooth and nail, both of them will be hurt. And when they both hurt, all the rest of us in the world will also be hurt because trade is highly globalized today. There are all sorts of components and parts that for making everything work in the world today. The globalized world is totally globalized. The trade in the world is totally globalized. So if these two superpowers fight each other, the rest of the world will hurt too.
So what do you think that businesses can do then to shield themselves or protect themselves against some of the potential impact that this trade war has on the economy?
I think the first thing that you have to do is that to make sure that if you have your own manufacturing plants in the US, if you have your manufacturing plants in China, you thinking about moving to a third country. I know of a few businesses who have been approached, for example, by China. Today is an opportunity for Malaysia. So if you are a company in Malaysia, you might want to reach out to some companies in China to say, can we collaborate with you to open a manufacturing plant in Malaysia so that when we do this joint venture, we can then export them to a US without incurring the tariff. So that's one opportunity you can do. You take these opportunities, crisis, to become an opportunity. And that's a tremendous opportunity for doing it because almost everything on the list in America is an opportunity for manufacturing plant here. Any businesses that's listening to this podcast must look at the opportunity here and quickly grab it because the Vietnamese are looking at it and the Indonesians are looking at it. The rest of the world are looking at this as a great opportunity. But this trade war is not going to end. It's going to go on for a long time. I believe because the reality today is that America has got to get used to the fact that China is going to become the economic hegemony. Without doubt. They are already toe-to-toe. And all the things that I've described before, what the Chinese are doing, look at what they're doing even on deep sea. They are really, really going for it. And so you got to get used to this. And as I said, even the bilateral currency swaps, 53% of Chinese trade is already done outside the US dollar denomination. So in the future, when more and more countries are doing swaps with China, and eventually it will be very difficult for America. They got to get used to the fact that China will eventually, and without doubt, will become the biggest economy in the world.
Yeah, and I think China is fast advancing, as you've mentioned. It's not just on the back end with bilateral trade agreements with different countries. 53% of the trade not requiring the US dollar, operating out of the US dollar. But also then in terms of if we want to look at it from a consumer standpoint on the front end, also very dominant. You mentioned DeepSeek, but even in terms of the car market, if we just look at BYD alone, BYD is fast catching up. In fact, I think they are. If I look at the latest figure in 2024, BYD actually surpassed Tesla in terms of global EV production.
Not surprised.
And so we already start to see this happening even in the global car market. It's like you said, it's not going to be long before I think they actually are dominating. Mom actually was just saying earlier how China's approach has always been kind of the silent killer. They're obviously not making as many headlines. You don't have someone as quite as entertaining as Trump making these bold, outlandish statements and promises, but they've been putting in the work silently before things have escalated. They had already been putting in the work, and I think there's something to be said here also about, I think for us as leaders, leading by example. Obviously there's a need for charisma in the things that we do. You want to be able to inspire a team. But I think ultimately, if you want to talk about healthy competition, then, and I specifically use the word healthy because you do need to compete.
Yeah, you
but
do.
Of course, there are ways that we can compete
Yeah.
that are healthy. But as you do engage in kind of healthy competition with one another, you also want to make sure that you are there's an element of silently doing the work. And I think there's a lot of power in doing that. One example is Robert Greene in his book.
You should tell that story.
Yeah, I mean, he shares in his book, The 48 Laws of Power, he shares a story of Sir Christopher Wren, the famous British architect. And he was tasked to build a town hall. And I remember the story goes that as he was building it, the mayor requested that he put in place 2 pillars because he felt that the sort of cantilevered approach, it just didn't have enough kind of structural integrity. But rather than arguing his case verbally, he decided, okay, I'll put in the pillars as you suggested. And so he built the pillars per the mayor's request. But it was only years later, when the building was being inspected, where people realized that while the pillars were there, the pillars did not actually make contact with the ceiling. So in fact, the pillars were completely useless, further solidifying his point that there was no need for the pillars. And I think that kind of serves as a far more powerful...
Did he tell... he reminded the mayor.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure if this is a fabrication, but a lot of accounts of the story they say that he had at the opening, at the launch of it, he then turned to the mayor and said, "Well, I've put the pillars there as you asked, but if you look closely, they're not actually making contact."
To prove the point, the cantilever works without needing the 2 pillars.
Correct. And sometimes it's like that in the things that and it's not just in terms of if you're talking about competition. Between businesses, but actually even in conflict resolution. The old adage is that sometimes you need to lose the battle in order to win the war. And this is a very good example of that. By being silent, it might sometimes seem that you are maybe losing the battle. But what's important is that in that silence, that it's a productive silence, and that we are putting things in place to kind of create that future, if you like. So in the case of China, then making these kind of bilateral agreements with other countries, also, establishing dominance in different markets with EVs and now in the AI space as well. I think if we lead or if we try to win the overall war through our actions, that serves as a far more powerful statement than simply winning an argument. In the case of Sir Christopher Wren, it was far more impactful to have built the thing to prove its redundancy than if he were to just simply argue the case. Because if he were to even if he were to win the argument, the mayor will probably feel like, he probably should have done that. But what happens now is you have these 2 pillars there as a permanent reminder of the fact that the mayor had lost his little battle. We talked a little bit about the impact of all of this on businesses. You are returning to PEMANDU Associates after your year-long sabbatical. What do you think that we should be doing as a firm to safeguard ourselves from the potential impact of all of this?
Well, the interesting, this PEMANDU Associates, we don't have any projects in China, nor in America, so we're shielded from it in that sense. But I think that the thing that is very important today is that our clients, if we have a client that is thinking of improving the businesses and we are talking to them about increasing it, we will ask our client to really examine opportunities that are going to be there for them to have in doing this. In particular, when you get into trade. Doing trading is a very important thing at this time. Figuring out how to go and do trades that will be able to work in a way that will circumvent, if you like, a lot of these
and I asked
manufacturing
because we have a non-consulting
That's
arm.
also
We have a trading arm called Perintis Akal within our PEMANDU group. What does that look like for Perintis Akal?
There's the opportunity for doing many of those type of things, even our clients as well. But most importantly, as I return, beyond just thinking about this, and I had had a lot of time to think about what we can do as a business. There are many more new ideas that I have in mind for us to talk about when I return. We will have a discussion internally with the management team, figuring out our strategy moving forward. What you guys have laid out will continue, but on top of that, there are strategic things that we will need to do. We don't talk about it here and now, but I had a lot of time to think about that during the period when I was away. And that's the best time, when you sit down there and think about it with a really cool towel on the head and ask the question, what are the new things that we need to do to make sure that we build from where we are before, and then move forward? I think that's time for doing that. The best time is during a crisis. The opportunities are arising here. So we will talk about more details when I do return.
Well, very exciting, because it's exciting for the team as everyone awaits your return, but also something to look forward to for subsequent episodes as well, as we begin to maybe share a little bit more of some of these developments with our audience on the podcast. So I think this was a good session. Thank you all for listening to yet another episode of The Game of Impossible. We hope you've enjoyed today's discussion as we talk about some more recent developments, current affairs, slight shift of pace to our usual episodes, but we hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please, we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as Spotify, where we have our long-form episodes. But we also have short-form content on both our IG as well as TikTok at The Game of Impossible. Once again, thank you, and we'll see you next week.